the main thing about commitment is committing to a schedule. So still have breakfast. Who are my coffee drinkers? You still have your cup of coffee or tea in the morning close to the same time. I see Joanna's got hers close to the same time every day. Plan breaks. If you take a break in the middle of the day and you go for a walk, and I see my walkers on the screen right now, continue to take that walk, continue to take that break. If you have a deadline every Tuesday at 12:30, continue to maintain that deadline on Tuesdays at 12:30. So the main thing is making sure that you stick to a schedule for all of your family members. And next we'll talk about how and why you should write that down. So in terms of commitment, it's also important to talk about how we're defining levels of productivity. I know for me, our transition to moving to online teaching for all of our courses is still making sure that I have office hours during the same time that I normally have office hours for my students. It's just Zoom office hours now. So even though no one may come, just like during the regular days, students may not come to my office, but it's still productive time that my students know that they can find me online during that specific time and during our regular class times. In terms of productivity, there are lots of templates online. I use my Google Calendar and my Outlook calendar, and I make sure that those are synced, so I have my reminders. So those are apps that I use to help keep me accountable and on track. You want to make sure that you define productivity for all of your family members, just like everybody's getting up, getting dressed, having coffee, having breakfast, and having a schedule. You want to make sure that for our little ones, for people who are being homeschooling their kids, what does productivity look like for them? So if they have a block schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday are different classes, you want to make sure you kind of maintain that same schedule that they would at school. So for instance, if they have art on Fridays, okay, what can we think creatively about so that the kids still have art or art class or some type of art project at that same date and time. In terms of space, this is kind of really difficult, but it's important to define how we're committing workspace versus our creativity space. So workspace is, okay, what is that defined space that, you know, when I'm sitting in this red chair here in my office on campus, what does that look like for me? So that is, okay, I have a cup of coffee, okay, between 9:30 and 11, I'm working on this specific task for the day. I'll take a break, have lunch, say, hey, Mo, what's going on? Check in with him, see how he's doing, and then go back to that designated workspace. So, you know, not having the TV on, excuse me, not answering calls. I mean, the things that you would normally do on a typical day. So for the workspace, it's not about how big or small it is. It's about what is that designated space that you know that you feel like you can be productive. So as long as we have workspace, it's also important to have creativity space. So what is that space where you're drawing or you're painting or you're just watching TV or your favorite show is on? You still kind of want to have that break. And even if that space is technically the same space, moving your laptop, moving your books, moving your papers into your bag so you physically don't see them. And I know I'm guilty of this because then it's 7:30, 8 o'clock. Oh, let me just work a little bit more. Guilty as charged. But what I'm doing now is closing my laptop, putting it in the case, putting the case in my work bag underneath the desk. So now that just becomes a space where I set the remote control while I'm watching TV for the evening. So making sure that you define what is creative space versus workspace. Okay, so for our first piracy for today was commitment. Now we're talking about connecting. Oftentimes when we think about things that we want to do, it stays here and it doesn't actually come to fruition. So it's important to make sure you're setting goals for the things that you want to accomplish on a daily or weekly or now monthly basis. One thing that I found that's been really productive is writing those goals down. So oftentimes I'll think, oh, these are the things I want to do this week, but when I don't write it down, it's likely that it just doesn't get done. So for example, one goal that I have this week is to write down all of my work deadlines on my calendar by today. So that's what I'll do after this meeting because it's written down and it's on my calendar that before noon, all of my work deadlines in terms of grading, manuscripts that are due, advising sessions, all those things will be in my work calendar. So even though that's a task that is writing things down in terms of when things are due, it's still a task that I can check off my list to say, okay, this is something that I completed today. So no matter how small or great you think the task is, the key is to write it down and attach a time and a deadline and what productivity looks like for that particular goal. So oftentimes, most of you have heard of this, it's called SMART goals. So any goal that you write down is something that you set for yourself that you want to achieve, it has to be specific, it has to be measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So I work with my students and even advising, and I'll help my students set goals. And so they'll say, well, I want to get a 4.0 this semester. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, do you have a schedule? Have you written down all of the assignments and exams that you have due for the week, for the month, and for the semester? Have you set up advising times to meet with your professors before and after midterms? It has to be specific and it has to be measurable. So you can measure whether or not you got a 4.0 at the end of the semester. And it also has to be attainable. If you have, a C average at midterms, we're all smiling with our students. Is that a time that we can kind of revise and reflect and look differently to say, okay, if this 4.0 isn't attainable, what is attainable? Is a 3.0 attainable? Can you work to have A's and B's in all of your classes for the rest of the semester? And it has to be relevant, right? So it has to be something that they can do, that we can do to make it personal for ourselves right now, at this time, this week, this semester. And the last part, it has to be timely. So for example, for myself, I'm working on a manuscript with a colleague on campus. So for me, having that outline by the end of the week is really important, because I can't write the paper until I've actually written down, developed the outline. So for me, that's something that I have to do first. And we want to think about things in terms of sequential order. So no matter what the task is, no matter what the goal is that you've set for yourself, no matter how big or small it may be, think about this. Is it specific enough? Can I measure it? Is there a product at the end of this? Is it realistic and attainable? And what is the timestamp or the date that I'm putting this for myself for it to be complete? So those are our Power C's for today: commitment and connecting our goals and our objectives to what we want to accomplish. So at this time, we will take questions.
Looks like we have a question from another favorite colleague on campus, the famous Jennifer Ellis. The pressure to keep both school and work going for homeschooling.
The pressure can both be overwhelming and hard. Absolutely agree, especially for our folks who are homeschooling, as Dr. Ellis stated. So probably my first suggestion would be separating workspace from creativity space. And I know this is difficult, particularly if we're in a smaller space, but it's hard to kind of designate what space is creative and what space is work. So the first thing that I would do is have a schedule for the family. So what's the schedule like for work, and then what's the schedule like for students? I think because the parents can probably provide a little bit more flexibility in terms of making sure that the children have their set schedule. So that may mean that parents are kind of taking away from their kind of 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 work time. So there may be a little bit of shifting there. And this is a hard one. I don't have kids, so I'm probably not the best person to provide that. So if Dr. Ellis or Dr. Steele have other suggestions, again, feel free to chime in. So I think one thing is to have designated space in terms of whether he's 4 or they're 14, what does space look like in terms of this is their desk, this is where they're sitting, this is where they're doing their work and having their schedule, and then a separate space for you to have yours. And then when that time comes, kind of the end of the day, the end of the day ends, to make sure that we move the laptop, we move the crayons, we move all the things that remind us kind of work and school. And then that table or that dining room table becomes the space for dinner, for catching up with family and friends.
It's also missing. Yeah, understandable. All right. Any other questions for Shewanee this morning? Oh, let's see.
Yeah, so again, I think this is a great way that I think that we can all connect, is just to really share and be on one accord that the transition is still happening, that many of us are still trying to work out the kinks. As David said, we still have folks in our grill who are kind of in our face, wanting or needing our attention. And it's a difficult time. I would say also give yourself a pass that if you just have a day that it just didn't work out the way you had anticipated, that's okay. I think that's expected and definitely normal. So for the parents, don't be too hard on yourself at all in terms of this adjustment, because many of us are educators of our big folks and not necessarily our little people. So that's a different type of skill and patience. And I think a lot of folks are wanting teachers to get paid more and to know that how much we value and appreciate them. So shout out to all our K-12 folks.
Absolutely. Looked like Casey had a question about being able to stay connected in other ways if you don't have a network at home.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really familiar with anything that UTC is providing in that particular space, but if anybody else knows of anything.
I think now that we all have access to a Zoom account, Casey, it might even be a good idea, people that you would normally have, standard kind of meetings with, can you meet with them via Zoom? I found just actually seeing colleagues and seeing people that, you could send an email, but there's something to be said about seeing people's faces, seeing them smiling. It kind of reminds you of the familiarity of being on campus and the energy that comes from seeing each other and serving our students. So that could be one thing. I'm not sure if you're on Instagram or Twitter or kind of some of the other major social media platforms, but that's kind of another way to connect. I think it depends on if, Casey, if you're kind of a face-to-face person or if you're more kind of a tech person and can communicate that way. But I would say kind of explore what your best strategies are and think about what would kind of support you in that way.
Jill had an interesting comment, the virtual happy hours. Jeff was sharing with me, there's a tool similar to Zoom called Hangout, which I think allows folks to interact with each other and maybe even play games virtually and whatnot. So that may be a suggestion.
So I see people are dancing in the middle of Zoom meetings. I would say this just expresses our humanity, and I think probably everybody had a good laugh with Jill's daughter dancing in the background. I'm sure Jill did not appreciate that, but I think it reminds us of our humanity and that we're all kind of really in this together trying to figure out what's the best strategy.
Oh, I appreciate that, Debbie. That's exactly what we had hoped, is that this would give folks that opportunity to stay connected and just be inspired to go about our day. I've said it before, it is difficult not to be concerned about what's going on around us, but it is so important for us to stay connected and maintain that bond. So.
Yeah, I think to Laura's point, I think people would possibly be interested just to connect and see other people's faces. And it may not necessarily be talking about work. It's just talking about how we're feeling, any anxiety and frustration. And then I think in those smaller, larger groups, people can connect and share and find, new ways and new strategies that have worked for them that might help someone else. So it sounds like Laura and I are going to coordinate after this Zoom meeting and connect and find a common time to share and see everybody.
That sounds like fun.
Excellent point, Mark. And Mark, the apps that I'm going to talk about are on Thursday session. So just as a FYI, Mark had a question yesterday about apps that we can use to practice guided meditation. So that's coming on Thursday.
A good little teaser to keep people coming back for more. Good job, Shewanee. All right. We want to be mindful of Shewanee's time. She does still have classes to teach and students to educate. So without any other pressing questions, we are going to let her go do her wonderful work. And again, thank you all so much for participating in this. It's so gratifying to find folks are finding it helpful and beneficial. So we will look forward to seeing you the rest of the week. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great day, and stay in touch.
Yes, and we love cuties. So cuties are those kids that pop up on the screen, so it makes us smile. So Power C, and the cuties are doing Power Cs.
Aw.
We love it. I know there's some more cuties and our fur babies as well. All are welcome, all ages.
That's right.
Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow.
Thank you again, Shewanee. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.